Hey guys, what's up? It's Stacking Chairs, the youth ministry podcast, all about youth ministry.
Stacking chairs.
About stacking chairs. If you are serving in youth group, if you're serving in camp, whatever youth ministry is, whatever God has you doing, thank you so much for doing that thing. Guys, we're here. I'm Josh, your host, and I'm joined by my other host, Kyle.
I'm Kyle, yeah.
And we're joined by a guest for the first time
today. This is our very first, I know you don't like to quote or signify, this is this show on this day, but this is our first guest.
It is our first guest, and so we can't say what it's the first day of. Can we say it's the first day of Pursuit Camp? We don't want people knowing. Do I have to edit this out?
Josh, at the end of the day, you're in charge.
Am I?
Yeah.
And you just said it.
Yeah.
Oh my word, the guest is here.
And
right there, just
ladies
like
and gentlemen, this is our good friend, Jason Lamb. Jason works for an incredible organization called Dare to Share. Jason, what is the heartbeat? Maybe somebody's out there going, what in the world's Dare to Share? Dare to Share what?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks. It's awesome to be with you guys. Anyway, I did not realize I was the very first guest.
You are first guest.
So this is. I feel like I need to bring my A.
We're gonna have you.
You may have preeminence.
We have to have him stack some chairs.
Big words.
Yeah.
See if he can stack chairs.
Well, yeah. Well, we need to ask him a question about stacking chairs.
We'll have to ask him, but we'll wait till the introduction.
First,
what is Dare to Share?
Tell us about Dare to Share.
Can I share about me and Dare to Share?
Share about you and Dare to Share. We just care about the organization that you're here.
Appreciate that. So I've been in youth ministry for over 20 years now in a variety of different capacities. Have served as a local youth pastor in local churches, was a church plant pastor, have been at Dare to Share a total now almost 10 years in two different parts. But even when I've been at Dare to Share, still volunteering in student ministry in a small group. I'm a middle school small group leader right now, so that lets you know that I drank the Kool-Aid a little time ago.
This man is crowns in heaven on a weekly basis.
I used to trick people into that role. And then I was like, oh, sure, I'll be a middle school guy, small group leader. I love Dare to Share because Dare to Share is all about the gospel of Jesus Christ. And specifically proclaiming that and then training and equipping students and youth leaders to effectively communicate it. We put it in terms of gospel fluency. Like for all of us that have believed in Jesus Christ and believed the gospel, like we know it and more than likely could fumble through explaining that to somebody, but we want people to be able to confidently, boldly articulate that message. So we talk about it in terms of gospel fluency, but even bigger than that, Dare to Share Ministries, we believe God's given us a vision that every teen everywhere would hear the gospel from a friend, which sounds really cool. It's a great vision statement, looks good on a t-shirt and a bumper sticker, but then you kind of go, well, what does that even mean? There are 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion teenagers around the planet. And so we're very serious when we say every teen everywhere hearing the gospel from a friend. We want all 1 billion teenagers, middle school and high school students, to have the opportunity to hear the gospel and to hear the gospel from a friend. We're all about, and we'll talk about it today, youth leaders giving the gospel every week, adults proclaiming the gospel. But when a student, a 13-year-old, hears the gospel from their 13-year-old believing friend that goes to church, that carries so much more weight and impact than them hearing it from the 35-year-old stranger when they show up to youth.
Sure.
They need to hear it all the time and all those things, but we're very passionate about mobilizing and equipping students to be everyday missionaries in their community, on their campuses, to proclaim the gospel. I mean, think about it, and I know we're going to talk a lot about youth ministry today, but think about the transformation that would happen in youth ministry is if my students, so me as a middle school guy, small group leader, that as they invite their friends, they're not just bringing lost friends to church to hear the gospel from me in small group or large group, but what if our students were trained and equipped so that when my 12-year-old son, who's in my small group, invites his friend on Sunday morning and introduces him and says, hey, this is my buddy Tim, who I led to Christ last week. He's 4 days old in his faith, and this is his first time. Like how radical would that transformation be in youth ministry if that's the type of thing that we're talking about? So anyway, obviously super passionate about Jesus, the gospel, love the local church. We're all about working alongside the church and again, specifically youth leaders. In order to reach 1 billion teenagers with the gospel, we know we have to partner and work directly with youth leaders and raise youth leaders up to what we would call gospel advancing leaders, which simply put is just a youth leader who shares the gospel personally and then mobilizes teenagers to do the same. So we've got to be living it as leaders.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. And then mobilizing our students to do the same. So that's what we're all about, man. Every teen everywhere hearing the gospel from a friend.
And one thing that I've appreciated about Dare to Share is helping to fuel that, to use your guys' terms, to fuel that gospel urgency.
Right.
But it's not just the urgency. It's not just the passion to, I have lost friends out there. it's equipping people with tools so that they can actually be gospel fluent.
100%. And I'm glad you brought that up because I mentioned gospel fluency. There's kind of three phases of that. There's gospel urgency, to recognize there's lost people all around us who desperately need to hear the gospel. We live in a broken world. God has set up the church's plan A to reach this lost and broken world. So we've got to recognize that urgency.
Right.
Gospel fluency then is that I'm trained and equipped to be able to go out and do something about that, to proclaim the gospel. And then we also talk about gospel strategy. As a youth leader, are you setting up shop, so to speak? Is your youth ministry set up in such a way that the gospel is central to what you do, that you're mobilizing your students to do that gospel urgency and fluency is all about what you do, that you're building a holistic approach to youth ministry, which we would call gospel advancing ministries to do just that. And so, gospel urgency, gospel fluency, gospel strategy is that larger picture of the engine that drives that vision.
So Josh, I don't know about you, but there's no question I hear gospel urgency from our pulpits.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sure there are some Sundays, I'm sure there are some churches out there that don't preach it, but on a pretty regular basis, almost any church I go to talks about gospel urgency. I would even argue or believe that a lot of churches have almost have a strategy for gospel fluency or have conversations about gospel fluency. But the strategy is almost like this one event, this one time, and then, hey, you just need to take care of it yourselves. I've never heard anybody actually say those words from the pulpit.
Right.
Yeah.
But I see that, but I'm curious, and Jason, where do you think the breakdown happens? Because again, if we're preaching gospel urgency,
Right. I think you're right. Most churches, hopefully all churches, understand the centrality of the gospel in some way, shape, or form. Like we're about Jesus. We believe in Jesus. We've been given the Great Commission. Like we know the mandate that is set before us. And sometimes the breakdown is in the how, or we assume, well, because everybody in our congregation, and maybe not everybody, but most of the people in our congregation youth groups are believers, surely the message that transformed them, they communicate it. Interestingly enough, at Dare to Share Ministry, we call it the mic test. So it's like if you put a microphone in front of one of your students and said 2 minutes, proclaim the gospel, as if I don't know what it is. How many of your students could pass the microphone test? Wow. I'm going to peel back the curtain and let the cat out of the bag. Most youth leaders would say, well, of course, my students that are saved, that know Jesus, in relation with him, could articulate the gospel. My simple challenge is run the mic test. Put out. And so we made that assumption in our student ministry. Again, I serve at a local church as a small group leader, but we kind of put that before our students. And some of our leaders operated under that assumption. Hey, they're believing kids. Surely they can articulate the gospel.
Jason goes to our youth group.
So we asked our students, that was actually kind of our opening icebreaker before we did one of our first gospel fluency trainings within our local church was, how many of you feel like you could articulate the gospel? And we're not even going to pass fail it. Just you on your own feel the confidence. If I hand you a microphone right now, could articulate the gospel. Do you know how many kids raised their hand in youth group that day?
Well, how many do you have in youth group?
Well, in middle school, we have about 60 or 70 students.
Okay. So out of 60 or 70, I'll say 10.
10. Okay. Josh, you
I
want
don't know. I feel like maybe there's kids who are more confident and think they do that rose their hand. I'm going to say 20.
Okay, cool. You guys both overshot.
Oh, so
at least in our setting, we had seriously like one kid raised his hand.
Wow.
It was my kid, so he hears it all the time. It's kind of like cheating. And then another kid who she went like this, kind of that halfway up and down, like I think so. And interestingly enough, as we progressed over the last couple of years, she's been like a front runner in all of this.
That's awesome.
Now, if we pose that same question, because we've implemented gospel strategy, we've focused on gospel fluency, we've stayed faithful to what we've always been about, gospel urgency, easily over the half of our students could do it confidently. And I would even say right now, probably 70 to 80% of our students could at least what you might call fumble through it. Like they've got the framework, they know. And so there's a confidence thing that we continue to work on, which speaks to why when we do these things, it's not the one event a year, check the box. We talked about the gospel, train the gospel. Right. It's an ongoing thing. So the microphone test, man.
So let me ask you this, Jason. We talk about it. I really believe that most youth pastors out there, most youth leaders, most church goers want to be about the gospel. But somewhere, because of busyness of schedule, timidity of personality, we could go on and on and on and on and on. In your mind, where is the practical breakdown of why it doesn't happen in I think we can talk about individual lives in a moment, but like overall.
Yeah. So let me even back that up one layer.
Okay.
And let's talk about youth ministry, the audience. So people listen to this podcast, youth ministry in general, some of the things that we have learned. And at Dare to Share, we actually were operating for a long time. I wouldn't say on a wrong assumption, but it was an incomplete or inaccurate assumption of the youth ministry audience. And so what we have recently learned is within Protestant evangelical churches nationwide, 70% of those churches either have no youth leader or they have a volunteer youth leader. Like it's the mom or dad who's standing in the gap. It's somebody, maybe youth ministry made an impact in their life. They want to serve their church in that way. So 70% of youth leaders are volunteer. The next 15% of youth leaders are bivocational or part-time. And so they probably still, like a volunteer, have a 9-to-5. They maybe get a stipend or a part-time pay from their church, but they're doing it kind of in the margins of life, if you will. Or if they're bivocational, maybe they're splitting time between jobs, have a little more.
Sure.
The last 15%, so 15% of all churches have a full-time paid youth leader position within their church. But what we've learned is even of those 15%, youth ministry is not always the sole focus of their full-time job. They also do youth ministry or college and kids or small group ministry or
the family pastor.
Right. And so youth ministry is, so all of that to say, as we surveyed the landscape, what we realized is, and so this leads to what's part of the breakdown, is it really is a capacity issue. We would not question the heart issue of youth leaders at Dare to Share. I think you nailed it on the head, Kyle. Like people who are serving in youth ministry, there's probably two things that are always true about them. They love Jesus. And then they love teenagers. The way we would say it at Dare to Share is we believe in the power of the gospel and the potential of teenagers. I think most youth leaders out there, that's true of them. But what happens in my volunteer bivocational capacity or even full-time and I wear 5 hats within my church, sometimes I get to Wednesday afternoon and it's like youth group's in 3 hours. And so I'm pulling curriculum, and there's great youth ministry curriculum and resources out there, but what we're learning, and again, not true of everybody, but it's, I get to youth group on 6 o'clock and I barely had time to print that out, and I use it as a script. So if it's not in that curriculum, if it's not, I'm living Wednesday to Wednesday. And so I don't, we at Dare to Share, we don't question the heart of youth leaders. They get it, they want it. It's do I have the capacity to pour more time into it? So oftentimes it's just, I'm showing up Wednesday night and I get through program because I love Jesus and love these kids, but it is all I can do to squeak through this 60 or 90 minutes. And I may not think about it again until next Wednesday afternoon.
That's easy to pitfall. I mean, even our youth group, my youth pastor is bivocational. He works another job and then he drives straight from work to youth group.
There you go.
Now he's always prepped. He always he works during the week, has his lesson figured out. But even me, I'm just a volunteer guy who shows up and just makes sure that kids aren't like picking their nose and flicking it on the guy next to him. And
and sometimes you can't even stop that.
I could tell that story. But I'm not telling stories in my youth group. But that definitely is the case. Like it's hard to find time, and praise God, I have a great guy who I get to work with who makes the time for that. But what do you do in that situation?
Well, and I would say, again, as I mentioned, there's a lot of great resources and curriculum out there in the Word of Life. We love the partnership with you guys because you guys have gospel focused resources and curriculum. We've partnered on some projects, incorporating some things together, and so some of it is even, taking a moment to evaluate the resources that you're using. Are you using things that do focus on the gospel, that do bring it up, that set you up as a youth leader to share the gospel every week, but also go another step further that are helping you mobilize and train and equip your kids on Wednesday night or Sunday morning to, as you're going through discipleship, Christ formation, being transformed by the gospel, that sharing the gospel is a significant piece of that, living on mission for that. And so Dare to Share, and I would invite all of you, check out our website, daretoshare.org, bottom third of the video, it'll be in the description for a hyperlink. We made a decision in the last couple of years as we learned about the landscape of youth ministry to say, hey, we don't want barriers between us and youth leaders using our resources. And so all of our digital resources now are provided at no cost to youth leaders. So we have over free. We have 75 or 80 curriculum, either one-off. We actually have several that are like 4, 6, 8-week studies, video-based, highly produced, in some cases, and sometimes it's just that PDF or Word doc download, but all those digital resources are free. Check out our web store. I can confidently say Dare to Share Resources, Word of Life, and again, several others out there, but they will keep you on track with that gospel urgency, fluency, help you implement gospel strategies. So if you are in a situation where it's just, I just got to get to Wednesday night and show up and execute. And whether I've got some time ahead to prep, or that you're relying on resources that are going to help you do the very thing that God has called you to do. I don't think I've ever met a youth leader who didn't want to see their students transformed by the gospel, transform more into the image of Jesus, that they didn't want their students reaching lost in their community. The heart is there, but then the how-tos, again, I get in that weekly rut. And even if you're full-time paid and have capacity, it's, I had to turn my receipts in, and we had staff meeting, and I met with these parents, and I hung out with these kids, which are all fantastic and part of youth ministry. But then it's like, okay, but how much time am I stepping back and going, what am I doing to mobilize my kids long-term to be everyday missionaries?
So let me do the plug, because there are a couple different resources and things that you guys have influenced my world and Word of Life's world. And there are 3 different things I would love for you to just kind of specifically talk about, because there are a ton of resources out there. First of all, the book Gospelize. Yeah. When I went through the book Gospelize and walked through those 7 values, that I would encourage you, if you're watching, grab the book. The 7 values gives you a great diagnostic test, like the Mike challenge.
Yeah.
For that's not what you called it.
Mike test.
Mike test. Yeah. But the diagnostic test of the 7 values really will help you to evaluate something's not functioning correctly in our ministry to produce gospel advancing leaders and gospel advancing students. And so which of those 7 diagnostics, where's that breakdown? I would encourage you to check that out. So
we'll give about the 7 values.
Second of all, the simple aspect of take 5 for the cause.
Sure.
Why is it so important to have a time in your youth group? I'm going to kind of give you the bit, but we talk about worship and how important worship is. We talk about prayer and not making it just a transition statement. We talk about the importance of preaching the word of God, and you may or may not believe in small groups in the context of your youth night or outside the youth night. But why would you remove one of those things or change the time frame so that you could do something like take 5 for the cause? Yep. And the third thing that is talk to us about the app, about the
Life in 6 Words.
Well, Life in 6 Words, but also the one, the person, the different religions and the different aspects. And to understand I'm not alone. Like, talk to us through those 3 things specifically. I know I just probably turned on the fire.
I was going to say there's a lot there, but let me put it in terms of when I was serving as a youth pastor in a local church. And so I had a good fortune. I was serving as a full-time youth leader in the church. Did have a couple other hats, but youth ministry got probably half of my time, which was great. But I knew personally that something was amiss in my youth ministry. I felt convicted by the Holy Spirit that I said the gospel was important. Yeah. I wanted my kids to share the gospel. And I just had one of those Holy Spirit moments one day in a quiet time. And the Lord was like, you say those things are important, but when's the last time you shared the gospel, Jason? And you say those things are important, but even when's the last time you gave the gospel in youth group? Yeah. And it was, God in his goodness, right, in his loving kindness dealt with me very gently, but it was very convicting. And so that was actually when I literally, like in 2004, Googled youth ministry evangelism or youth ministry gospel, right? Wow. And Dare to Share was like the first thing to pop up.
Sure.
And so I listened to Greg Steer, our founder, at some different, youth worker conferences, types of things. And one of the first things and the biggest takeaway I had from that breakout session 16 years ago was, youth leader, if you do nothing else, of all of our resources, all the tools, all the tips, just start giving the gospel every week and see what God does with that. Wow. And at the time, I just being very vulnerable and transparent, I was like, that sounds so simple and so stupid. Like, okay, give the gospel every week. And I was very cynical about it, but because of that conviction of the Holy Spirit working in my life, I was like, well, here's the deal. I know something's broken, so I'm at least going to give it a try. Yeah. And part of me was like, I'm going to give it a try just to see that it
just to prove it wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
But I was at a place that I'm like,
Dear
okay,
Greg.
I'll take that first step. And so I went back home and I started giving the gospel every week. And it was awkward at first because I wasn't in the rhythm of doing it. And I had to figure out how to work that in well. About 4 weeks into that process, was again using a Dare Share resource, was just simply talking about the reality of heaven and hell, not trying to base a fear base, but hey, this life ends, eternity.
This is reality.
This is reality. Paint a picture of heaven and hell. Wasn't even like dramatic about it, or it was just realities. And I gave the gospel. Again, like I'm 4 or 5 weeks into this. Of my 30 church youth group kids that were there that night, that I would have told you every single one of them was saved. 6 kids ended up making first-time professions to trust in Jesus Christ. Like I still get
That's amazing.
a little emotional about that because I was operating under the assumption because they were in youth group and they were in church that they were saved. And the reality is just because I go to church, just because I'm around other believers by default does not make me a Christian. I think sometimes we do, and I know I did, operate under the assumption that kids are saved. And so the beautiful thing then was within the next couple of months, I got to baptize all of those kids. Like we saw then, it sparked a mini revival in our youth ministry for the next couple of years. So I bring that up from the personal connection of me as a youth leader and how I was challenged. And I'm going to use that to answer your second question first, the idea of take 5 for the cause. I'm going to give 2 parts to it. One, as a youth leader, take that challenge. Give the gospel every week. And if you don't feel confident, again, we've got tools, resources. We've got an acrostic that we train students and youth leaders to use. It's not as hard as you think, but you want to have the right words to say. You want that gospel fluency. Yeah. Give the gospel every week. And then, as Kyle mentioned, take 5 for the cause. This is simply space in your youth ministry to do the open mic for 5 minutes. Say, hey, students, who had a chance to share the gospel this week? Let's hear from those that did. And if you didn't, maybe part of that take 5, we talk about testimonies in terms of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I shared the gospel and got shut down. I shared the gospel and my friend received that or is coming to youth group now. Or I shared the gospel and I totally screwed it up. Or I had the opportunity, like the Spirit was prompting me to share the gospel with my friend and I didn't. But I knew it and I'm praying for that friend. Like it doesn't matter the outcome, but we start creating space in our youth ministry. The beauty of Take 5 for the cause is what we're communicating is we expect this to happen. No matter what the outcome is, our responsibility is to proclaim the gospel. God does a work in their heart. That lost person has to choose to believe and receive that message. But our faithful part in this whole process and mission of being on mission with Jesus is to proclaim the good news. And we'll have students, when we do Take 5 for the cause, it may not be that they shared their faith with somebody, but it's a testimony like, hey, my friend, I just learned that they don't go to church. They're not a believer. I've started praying for them. Would you pray for my friend Jenny with me and pray for opportunity to share the gospel? But we make it normal. And it's interesting. I love how Greg, our founder, puts it. We talk about a lot of times at Dare to Share. The reality is if we surveyed our youth ministry program, we probably spend more time on announcements than we do things like testimonies and intercessory prayer.
Wow.
And so again, we want to be about the gospel. We know it's important.
Of course.
We got to start changing some program elements. And so sharing the gospel every week, Take 5 for the cause, fantastic places to start. That, I mean, you can start doing that the next time you have youth group after listening to this podcast. Like you can do that. So you mentioned Gospelize the book, right? So that's, if those things I just talked about were some gospel fluency type issues, Gospelize addresses that larger gospel strategy. I won't bore you with the study and the research and all the things, but what we found was youth groups that were seeing 25% new conversion growth. So in the scope of a year, 25% of their youth group came to faith through students sharing the gospel or the youth leaders sharing the gospel. We wanted to know if we could replicate and help facilitate the multiplication of youth groups like that across the board. If that became standard, what's common of those youth ministries? What are the consistent things? And that's what birthed the 7 values. And to run through those real quick, and again, daretoshare.org/gospel-advancing. I think there's a hyphen between gospel advancing, again, lower third, link in the description, great resources there. The 7 values, intercessory prayer fuels it. We've got to be praying for the lost. Are we as youth leaders praying for the lost in our lives? Are we praying for our students? Are we praying for their lost friends? Do we even program that in our ministry? Relational evangelism drives it. The challenge of sharing the gospel personally. Yes, share it from the pulpit as a youth leader. But am I as a leader, am I sharing the gospel personally? Am I training my students to be able to share that on their campus? Value 3, which becomes the linchpin and really becomes to you as youth leaders listening, leaders fully embrace and model it. And so my kids, if I'm training them to do this, some of them may catch on, but they're also going to look at me as the leader and say, but are you doing this? Because if we don't live and model this, our students won't either. That starts with us as the primary youth leader, but then that trickles to the adult volunteers and our student leaders that are helping lead our ministries with us. And so leaders fully embrace and model it. We have to be all into this idea. And then the final 4 values really get into program of youth ministry. So do we have a disciple multiplication strategy that guides it? So as kids come to faith, are we raising them up? Are they being transformed in Christ? Some of this is curriculum. Some of this is the values of our church, the culture of our church. Are we training and equipping students to proclaim the gospel so they can reach others? We talk about bold vision focuses it. And so, again, in terms of our church, where I go, Storyline Church in Arvada, Colorado, we did some research and found out there is 14,000 students who go to the 20 middle schools and high schools in our community.
Wow.
And it's actually closer to 15,000, but then based on youth group sizes in our community, we determined there's 14,000 kids who do not know Jesus. And so our bold vision as a youth ministry is, hey, we want to do everything in our power to make sure all 14,000 unbelieving students have the opportunity to hear the gospel from a friend and then respond to it, either say yes or no, but we want them to hear it. So what's the bold vision in your community and in your context? I mentioned earlier, 1 billion teens around the world. That's a lot of teenagers.
Oh, yeah.
That's a seventh of the population of the world.
Right. Yeah. As a youth leader, what am I going to do about 1 billion? But the hundreds or thousands in my community can have a bold vision for that.
Yeah.
Then we talk about biblical outcomes, measure it. That's value number 6. Most of the time when we talk about outcomes in youth ministry, when somebody asks you, how's your youth ministry doing? What are they ultimately asking?
How big is your youth?
How big is your youth group? How many kids are coming? That's the outcome we measure, is the butts and seats, as we would call it. That's a measurement. But we also talk about, in terms of biblical outcomes, hey, how many gospel conversations have we had as a youth group this year?
Yeah.
How many times have I proclaimed the gospel? Can I check the box on 52 weeks out of the year I proclaim the gospel in youth ministry? How many Bible verses have my students collectively as a group memorized? How many prayers have we uttered for the lost in program and also in our personal lives? So you start putting some of these other things that we can measure. These are biblical outcomes. These are speaking to the spiritual formation of the students we're leading and discipling. And it also speaks to our ministry impact in our community. So sure, count your attendance at your events, but then also count the things that let us know, hey, we're actually getting closer to reaching the 14,000 kids or the 1,400 kids in our community. And then value number 7, it becomes the big challenge. It's ongoing programs reflect it. And so again, it's not just hey, we did this to kick off the school year. We went over gospel events and we shared the gospel, check the box. We started there. Are we implementing curriculum? Are we doing things? Does our calendar look like we're serious about advancing the gospel in our community and context? Now, that may mean you got to add some things. You may have to stop doing some things. I would challenge us. There's a lot of things you're doing that you're probably 1 or 2 steps away from really gospelizing your ministry. So you got a ski trip. Well, keep doing your ski trip. But what if you challenge your kids to bring their lost friends? And then, you're going to give the gospel as you do whatever program on the ski trip. But what if you challenged your kids? Hey, you're bringing your lost friends. Try to have one gospel conversation with them this week. When you're riding that ski lift and they're stuck with you for the next 9 minutes, bring up the gospel, have that gospel conversation. All of a sudden now our ski trip isn't just about having fun and skiing, which go for it. I love skiing.
Yeah.
But now we've got some purpose behind it. So that's that idea of gospelizing. So again, our digital resources, Gospelize, you can purchase the hard copy, but we do have an ebook version of that. That's free to download. Again, go to the web store and check out the Gospelize book. So that book is super foundational. Huge overview of this idea of gospel advancing, and we'll give you some steps, questions to discuss with your team, steps to begin implementing that in your youth ministry. And again, real simple steps to implement: give the gospel every week, take 5 for the cause. And so I would say, from a big picture, and in response to your first 2 questions, that's the bang for your buck. Is take that passion that God has given you to reach your community, mobilize your students, and use these resources that will actually begin to help you do the very thing that we desire.
So you said in there the linchpin one, leaders fully embrace and model.
Absolutely.
I would argue in my life, I'm not going to challenge somebody to do something that I'm not doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really don't want to even open up the floor for a testimony time for something that I'm not doing, because that gives the opportunity for someone to say, well, hey Kyle, what about you? When was the last time you shared the gospel?
Well, we challenge other youth leaders. We do this in our student ministry. When we do our Take 5 for the cause, is we challenge leaders and us in leadership to be part of that testimony cycle. So that doesn't just have to be for your students. How much does it encourage your student to hear youth leader, adult volunteer leaders that, I'm doing this too.
Yeah.
And for them to hear from an adult, I was actually nervous when I stepped to the plate to share the gospel with my cousin.
Yeah.
And it started as an awkward conversation. but I got to lead my cousin to the Lord. Yeah. And then for a student to go, man, here's the reality, right? Your kids, right? They're looking at you be like, man, if he could do it, I definitely could do it.
Because they are more awkward than I am.
Yeah. So. Absolutely. But it does encourage them and it does validate then if my goal as a youth leader and in some way, shape, or form I'm communicating, I want to see you as a student transformed into the image of Christ, discipled to become a fully mature believer. And I'm saying sharing the gospel is important. I mean, they'll connect the dots. They'll be like, well, if you say this is important and you want me to be more like Jesus, but you're not doing it, what's up?
Absolutely. Well, last week we talked about vulnerability. You can't be vulnerable unless you're doing the thing that you're telling them to do. Like, you can't be vulnerable and say, hey, I'm also sharing the gospel. This is what I'm struggling with, unless you're actually sharing the gospel. Right. And these are things you're struggling with.
Right. And so, last thing, very, very quickly, you talked about the Life in 6 Words app that will help a student to walk somebody through the gospel, but there's that other side of the app, or the other app that, gives them tools and resources. I've got a friend that's a Buddhist. I've got a friend that's a Mormon. I've got a friend that's an atheist. Yep. And how do I begin a conversation with them? Again, guys, great resources. They'll talk to you about how to start a conversation with Ask, Admire, Admit, and just helping students and helping leaders to share the gospel. But on this app really gives a lot of resources for somebody to.
No, that's great. So Life in 6 Words app, again, li6w.com is the website, redirect you to the app store. That app does help you with gospel fluency, how to articulate the gospel. You put names of your friends that you're praying for, caring for, sharing the gospel with. There's a group feature. So as a youth group, you can see the activity of your students sharing it. So it's a fantastic resource. So I would encourage you to download the Life in 6 Words app. The app that you're talking about is also a resource on our website, but we take 14 world religions, worldviews, and help you start a conversation from somebody with that belief system, things that you can connect with and admire about what they believe. It gives you questions to get into a gospel conversation, things to focus on as you're having a gospel conversation that might speak more to a Mormon or somebody who's Hindu or of the Islamic religion, and helps you have those conversations. I mean, our kids are going to school with people from all types of different worldviews, so it is a little bit of a shortcut, if you will, or a jump start to having those conversations, and so a great resource. And then if I could do one more plug, what I would encourage you, check out Dare to Share Live. It's an annual event that we do. It's a simulcast event. We broadcast it from Denver. You stream it into your youth group. It's a one-day event in the fall on a Saturday in which your students are inspired with that gospel urgency, trained and equipped in gospel fluency, and then you do outreach in your community. Part of our program that day is 2 hours of you going into your community, sharing the gospel with their friends, going door to door, going to a park, wherever, sharing the gospel. So an event like a Dare to Share Live, which is in November, a couple months into the school year, might also help jumpstart this. Yeah. And again, to Kyle's point, we have an abundance of resources as Word of Life do, and I know we've talked about several of them. My encouragement would be identify one thing that you can do to start this journey. Get that in place. Maybe it's share the gospel every week. Yeah. Maybe it's take 5. Maybe it's I'm going to read that Gospelized book. Whatever it is, start with one step. Make that single commitment. And then as you begin to journey as a gospel advancing leader, keep going. And I would just, again, for the youth leader audience out there, if this is resonating with you, you're like, I know I need to share the gospel personally. I need to be about mobilizing my students to do the same. I'm going to encourage you, if I can, you can text the word commit to 27126. That'll hit us at Dare to Share. We'll start prompting some steps you can take. Kyle mentioned the diagnostic earlier. That will actually prompt you to download the Gospelized book. It'll point you to our Facebook group of right now over 1,100 gospel advancing leaders that are working through all of this in a Facebook community. Take that initial step as a youth leader to say, hey, I'm going to be about this. It's as simple as texting commit to 27126, and then again, access the website, check out those resources. But commit to the journey, and then it just like any other journey, it's just one foot after the other to get us there.
That's what I love about this whole conversation is like, I see in our youth group, my youth pastor doing like key elements of this, but there are steps that I hadn't even considered, like the testimony time. Like, hey, we're always telling kids like, hey, we share the gospel. We go through the gospel every week. And then we're saying like, hey, are you guys sharing the gospel? And they're like, no, I'm not. But if we're like, hey, this is how I shared the gospel this week. So we're doing practical steps. I'm pretty sure my youth pastor's actually like done a lot of the Dare to Share stuff because he's talked to me about it in the past.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But,
that's so good.
But like, I love that. Like, I feel like there's so many elements, especially within this community of other youth leaders, where we can all come together and say, hey, this is how we have incentivized the gospel being shared, because we're sharing ourselves and we're doing these steps. And
I think that's a little bit as we minister to youth leaders, that's part of maybe the burden we can help shoulder.
Yeah.
Is we can help orchestrate the big picture, help you with all the resources to do this holistic approach of gospel advancing ministry in your youth group. We can help with all the things that you need to be about.
Yeah.
You doing it implement one at a time, do what you do best, ministering to your students, pouring into their lives. We just provide the framework, for you to be able to do it.
And even the other resources, like you said, the Facebook page, but I know you guys do, there are youth leaders, bivocational, trivocational, and monovocational people out there that once a month they all get on a call together and they talk together, they pray together. So if you're listening, here's two things. Number one, just like Jason said, actually, I'm going to give you three things. Number one, like Jason said, grab one thing, do something.
That's it.
Do something with it. The whole thing, does it really have to start with me? Yes. You're listening to this podcast. God brought it across your doorstep. So yes, this is your opportunity and responsibility. So grab one thing. Number two, I would strongly encourage you to, as you're looking at these resources, bring your leadership team in.
Yes.
Because if you have the strategy, but you haven't communicated it to your youth team, or maybe you're sitting there going, well, I'm just a youth leader.
Yeah, like me.
Sit down with your youth pastor and say, hey, what is our strategy? What is our, because there's a good chance they have a strategy. They just haven't communicated it out. But then I would say you personally in your own life say, I might not be able to change the tide of everything around me, but I can change me. Because one thing, Jason, that I've noticed is you guys say, well, we're really focused on teenagers. Yeah, but you're really focused on leaders. If you're focused on youth leaders, they're going to impact the teenagers. They're also going to impact their home. They're going to impact the children that will one day be teenagers.
Yeah.
And so it's this whole idea of it can absolutely start with you. It's got to start somewhere. Do something. Hey, Josh, do we have a little bit of time to go into small group?
I think we have time. Listen, we just talked about the importance of small group.
Yeah.
So we can definitely go into small group.
Hit the small group.
I am
music.
a small group leader.
You are. Okay, so this week I actually asked an encouraging question. All right, instead of ministry fails,
good.
I said, what is a win that you've watched Jesus do in and through your students? I got a bunch of guys and some ladies responding and sharing.
Well, does he know what small group is? Did we tell Jason what small group is? Jason, small group is when at the end of our time of talking, we go and we either read encouraging stories or funny stories or just things people have talked about. One week we talked about a youth leader had seen the booger wall at his youth group. We have another week where someone put a hole through the wall.
Yeah.
We have lots of wall stories.
Vomit on floor.
Off the wall stories.
Fire departments being called.
Yeah. It's all over.
Do I get to share a story during small group time?
I think absolutely we should.
I mean, by all means.
Okay.
It's your show, so please go first.
Thanks.
I don't want to take over.
I was really hoping that's where the music would go.
Yeah, the song drops out.
Okay, so one guy said this way. This past weekend, we had our annual weekend retreat. The first small group, I had students write down what they wanted and hoped to get out of the weekend. One of my students wrote, why am I always doubting and questioning, not confident in God? Mm-hmm. He said by session 3 after small group, he came up to me with tears in his eyes, saying that his questions were answered. He gave me a big hug and he can't wait to get back home. To me, I know this guy. I have no doubt he probably talked about some of these things of how are you taking this back home to impact your world around you. Yeah. And there's got to be a whole lot of things that are encouraging, but few things that are more encouraging than when you see a student get it. And implement it not only in their life, but in such a way that it impacts other people's lives.
Yeah.
So, Jason,
that's perfect segue to the story that I wanted to share. And to your point, we want to reach those billion teens. It is primarily through the youth leaders. So our heart is for youth leaders. The youth leader that we work with, who's actually from upstate New York, she's been implementing gospel advanced vision. Just this week, she shared a story with us of her faithfully proclaiming the gospel in her youth ministry, mobilizing her students then to go out and share the gospel. This young lady, girl, shared the gospel with her lost friend. Her lost friend put her faith and trust in Jesus.
Praise God.
Went home to mom and dad, and said, this is what just happened in my life.
Yeah.
Through them working together, got to lead her mom and dad to Christ. That mom and dad reached out to girl number one believing students' mom and dad to say, hey, this is happening in our family.
Yeah.
And they were hungry to be in church and be discipled. And so
Oh, that's awesome.
one girl in youth group getting empowered, mobilized to share the gospel, leads her friend to Christ. They together lead that family to Christ, and now their families are on this beautiful discipleship journey together, doing church together.
That's awesome.
And you just go, that's why we do what we do.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's why we do youth ministries, because when that one kid gets it, one life, but then a family was transformed, and now a bond between this family. Like, why would we not want that to happen?
Right.
Yeah.
And so my thing is, you may feel like that's the outlier story.
Yeah.
That's like the God thing that happens every now and again. I'm like,
It doesn't have to be.
But what if we started normalizing
Yes.
Gospelize?
Yes.
What
There's
if
a millennial word for you. Normalize.
normalize. Like, what if that became the story of our youth ministry every single week? And I think, again, you're a few steps away, implementing some steps away from that being a what if to a every week.
Well, but again, I think that goes back to me for that take 5 for the cause. When I normalize the conversation,
That's it.
Yeah.
when it's not just something that I talk about, hey, we should be doing this and we do this out there on missions trips. No. I do it right here. So last story, I like this one because it felt like a simple, hey, I can implement this. A guy said this: our students have stepped up and taken over as the junior church decorating team. They have a theme every 4 to 5 weeks, and they decorate the entire junior church area with a budget of only $30 a month. The kids in junior church love it. Again, it's the whole idea of empowering your students with some type of way for them to own the ministry.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole entire time.
And think about the disciple multiplication in that. Students doing that for junior church, and then these little kids who are seeing the investment, as simple as decorations are, of these older kids. It encourages them in their faith journey.
Right.
And so, and again, then you get all things working together. Yeah, they decorate, but then they're also sharing that, like, these little kids are like, that's who I want to be when I grow up.
Yeah.
And the impact that has now across generations is beautiful.
We have something like that at our church. So we don't have a weekly children's ministry. We have a weekly youth group ministry. But so what we do is once a month, because we didn't have that, our youth pastor was like, we're going to start doing this thing called Kids Corner. So once a month, our youth group hosts this little kid, like, everyone comes in, and the youth group is highly, like, they help run it.
Awesome.
So, the youth pastor teaches, and then I run the game, but the students do everything else. They're the ones getting the snacks, the crafts, and they're being involved.
What an awesome opportunity for your students is they're being gospelized in youth group to then gospelize that monthly kids ministry experience, right? They're sharing the gospel every week. And again, these little kids then, as part of their journey, 10 years from now, there's going to be a junior in high school who's going to be serving in that ministry. Like, I remember when I was in 3rd grade,
and somebody
and the impact
me.
this it had in my again, disciple multiplication.
Yeah.
It's church.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us for Stacking Chairs. Would you do us a favor? Would you respond to us? Send us your stories. When you go and you implement that one thing from this week, tell us about it.
Yeah.
Tell us about maybe it's hard and you're working. Listen, we want to pray with you. We want to know that this is creating some difference in your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easy, and sometimes it feels like you're stacking chairs.
Stacking chairs. Oh, there it was, full circle.
What?
We didn't ask Jason how he stacks his chairs.
Jason, do you do the every other? Do you guys use the chairs or the folding chairs? Very quickly.
We have folding chairs.
Okay.
They need to face the same way. Do not hang them on the rack, back to front, front to back. It's back to front, back to front. They fit.
Amen.
Back to front, back to front. Okay, yeah. Okay. We're all on the same page. Well, guys, this has been Stacking Chairs.
See ya.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Thanks, guys.
Hey, we got
Appreciate
some more stairs to check.
Oh, more stairs to check.
Stairs to check.
Yeah, let's go stairs some checks.